I'm Wing Commander Sarah Charters, and I'm the Senior Nursing Advisor of the RAF Medical Reserves. I'm here today to tell you about Corporal Lydia Alford, a nurse who was born in Horton Heath and worked at the Royal South Hants Hospital both before and after World War II. Lydia Alford was a nursing orderly who joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. Nursing orderlies as a profession or a trade were introduced in 1941, and by 1943 over 200 nurses were trained to become aeromedical escorts. Initially they were flying just around the UK. In the lead up to D-Day, Sir Harold Whittingham, who was the director of the RAF Medical Services, called for volunteers to undertake air ambulance duties following D-Day and then following the Normandy campaign and through to victory in Europe. So Lydia was one of those nurses who put herself forward for these duties. They undertook their training at RAF Hendon, learning how to deal with acute traumatic injury. And then they moved forward and they took part in training sessions on aircraft. Their air ambulance was the RAF Douglas Dakota. Once they'd undertaken their trauma training, they then undertook air familiarisation training on the Douglas Dakota. And they flew just around the UK, and one of the things that they were checked for is whether they experienced air sickness, and those who couldn't recover from that were unable to take the duties. So move forward to June 1944, and the nurses were allocated to 3 airfields. That's RAF Blakehill Farm, RAF Down Ampney, and RAF Broadwell. On D-Day +7, which was the 13th of June 1944, 3 nurses flew from RAF Blakehill Farm across to a small airstrip in Normandy. And those nurses were Corporal Lydia Alford and her colleagues LACW Edna Burbeck and LACW Myra Roberts. They spent some time, a few hours over in Normandy because of the weather conditions, and then they had an opportunity to fly back, and Corporal Lydia Alford, the nurse from this village, was the first nurse to undertake an aeromedical evacuation mission from Normandy back to RAF Blakehill Farm. Myra and Edna joined her shortly afterwards, and the 3 of them were greeted by the UK's press, and they were dubbed the Flying Nightingales. And the term Flying Nightingales is still used for RAF nurses, both regular and reserve, today. Corporal Lydia Alford described her first landing in Normandy. She said, "Chiefly, I remember the dust, which was everywhere, coming up in great clouds. While the freight was being unloaded, I tried to make the wounded men as comfortable as possible in all that dust. I had water to give them and panniers of tea." So Lydia and her colleagues flew hundreds of missions from Normandy all the way through to Berlin and the end of the Second World War. And during that time, they evacuated hundreds of thousands of casualties back from mainland Europe. During their aeromedical evacuation missions, they were actually required to hand in their parachute, because if the aircraft actually came into trouble and it was going to crash, they were expected to go down with the aircraft, and if they survived, continue nursing the casualties on the ground. According to the RAF Museum, many of the wounded men evacuated were experiencing air travel for the first time. Knowing they would get back to Britain within hours boosted their morale. It was felt that the presence of female nursing orderlies on board the flights was especially comforting. Lydia's colleague, LACW Edna Burbeck, remembered, "They'd always know when we were over the coast. I'd tell them that and say, 'It won't be long before you're home,' and they'd cheer." Corporal Lydia Alford returned to her nursing duties at the Royal South Hants after the Second World War. She continued to live in the area, and she's now laid to rest in Pember's churchyard here in Fair Oak.